Hey Jack, I'm back, and with me, another speed art. This one is of Watto from Star Wars Episode 1. I just last week put out the Darth Vader evolution, and instead of recording myself working on a main character, I want to show you guys the details I put into what I call incidental characters. If you haven't seen the video, feel free to check it out with the link in the description to the main channel. I think it turned out really nice. I really want to focus on portraying the action between the costume changes more smoothly, so I figured with the lightsaber battles and space action involved with Star Wars, that Darth Vader would be a good way to try out some more action-heavy bits of animation. Now, I know a lot of people are mixed on the sequel trilogy and universally dislike the prequel trilogy, but I actually have a lot of fun watching all the Star Wars movies, and despite what some of the comments on the animation think, I actually like the prequels for what they are. But I recognize that they have some major structural issues, but I'll get more into that when I get to my ranking, and I think it's time for that right now. Oh, and I really liked reading everybody's rankings and top 3 on the Chucky films on that video, so if you have a ranking for the live-action Star Wars movies or a top 3, feel free to leave it down below before I influence you with my jibber-jabber. And yeah, so from worst to first, let's jump right into it. So at number 10, I'm gonna have to place Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Now, I know I said I don't hate the prequels, but it's pretty hard to sit through this movie sometimes. While I like a good chunk of what they're doing, such as Obi-Wan's side mission, Christopher Lee brings a certain gravitas to his portrayal of Count Dooku, and I actually really like the music. Across the Stars in particular is a great John Williams track, but for the most part the acting is pretty wooden, the romance feels forced, and the digital effects just don't hold up whatsoever. Now, I know it was 2002 and that's coming up on almost 20 years, but I just wish they used a little bit more sparingly. The ending battle in Geonosis I think suffers the most with all the CGI clones and droids fighting actors on blue screens, but part of the reason the film looks like a downgrade compared to the original trilogy and even Episode 1 in my opinion, is because they switched from filming on film to filming on digital cameras for Episode 2, and the technology just wasn't where it needed to be to truly capture George Lucas's vision. But I applaud him for taking a risk, and because partly thanks to this film, they improved techniques for filming with digital cameras that they now use and have implemented since. So there's that to gain from this film. Okay, enough about Episode 2, and let's fill out the coveted number 9 position with Solo, A Star Wars Story. Now remember, I don't hate any of these movies, and when I saw this film in theaters I had a lot of fun, but there just wasn't much of anything at all that memorable. The characters felt bland, the shots and the cinematography felt murky and flat, and Alden Ehrenreich, while fine, just didn't feel like Han Solo to me. It's kind of like how I look at Jake Lloyd and don't really see Anakin because I better associate him with Hayden Christensen. It also doesn't really help that movie felt about 30 minutes too long, and the twist ending, while it was cool, it certainly felt a little tacked on. I heard that they filmed that scene in such a way that they could have placed any number of characters into that hologram, so while I don't regret watching it, I probably won't be re-watching it anytime soon. And cracking the top 8 is gonna have to be what many people probably consider to be the best prequel, Star Wars Episode 3, The Revenge of the Sith. Now, for the longest time, I too thought this was my favorite prequel. It's darker, the sword fight is well choreographed, we see Vader in the Death Star, and the opening space battle is pretty fun. But it just feels like a film that was more concerned with bridging the gap between the first 2 prequels and the original trilogy that it failed to truly shine as its own film, not to mention how Mace Windu and General Grievous both were wasted far too easily. And while I actually really like the scenes with Palpatine trying to persuade Anakin, the whole transition just happens a little too fast from angry Jedi to child murderer. But again, despite these flaws, I really enjoy watching the movie. It never gets too bogged down in politics and moves pretty quickly, so if there's a scene that you hate, you only have to wait a minute or two to get to a scene that you maybe enjoy a little bit more. Okay, so coming in lucky number 7 is gonna have to be Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Now, when people talk about a movie with good story but bad execution, I almost immediately think of Star Wars Episode 1. While the CGI was groundbreaking at the time, it does look pretty cartoonish by today's standards, but it does benefit from being shot on film as opposed to Episode 2, and while the story isn't as fast-paced as Episode 3, I feel like it works pretty well in general, and yeah, the political mumbo-jumbo about Trade Federation treaties is probably some of the boringest stuff put in a Star Wars movie, but the lightsaber battles, and especially Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon battle with Maul, feels like a highlight in the trilogy. I also think that John Williams may be at his best in terms of musical compositions, and yeah, maybe the Naboo Gungan battle should have been cut from the film entirely. I feel like there's still some fun to be had with the chronological first entry in the Star Wars saga. And moving on and coming in at number 6 is gonna have to be Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Now, when I first saw this, I felt it was a better film than The Force Awakens. but every time I try to sit through it since, it just feels out of place and out of tone with the other films. Maybe this wouldn't bother me if it wasn't like a direct prequel to A New Hope, but it just feels like a film that's in its own series. It also kind of has the same murky camera issues as a Solo, but the space battle at the end is a highlight, as well as the beach fight with the main characters. And while the final 2 minutes with Darth Vader is probably the coolest singular scene in a Star Wars movie, tonally it matches up horribly with A New Hope. And character-wise for Darth Vader, he feels like a completely different person. In A New Hope, he's like an old broken down horse, while in Rogue One he comes off like a pit bull off of a leash. But because I feel the film works pretty well on its own, that's why it comes in far above the prequels in terms of overall quality, and that's why it takes the number 6 spot. So rounding out the number 5 place is gonna have to be Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. Now I know the internet is very divided on this film for one reason or another, but when I saw it in theaters, and again one I watched on Netflix, I actually really like a lot of what Rian Johnson was trying to do. The shots and the cinematography are beautiful, the CGI and the puppetry is at the best in the series, the kamikaze scene is hauntingly beautiful, and the throne room fight is one of the best fights in Star Wars. But where the film fails is on the character side of things. It takes the characters from the original trilogy and Force Awakens and makes them do things that they would never have done. This is especially evident with Luke, who apparently just ran away to die to let the galaxy get controlled by the First Order, and also makes him a slapstick comedian half the time. And every plot thread fans were interested in got dropped like a hot potato, like Rey's family, Snoke's origin, and also the Knights of Ren. Where they at, but I did really like the scenes with Yoda and Luke, and the ending projection scene with Luke against Kylo Ren was a nicely done sequence. Unfortunately, it has the same issue as Solo where it just felt 30 minutes too long. They could have probably cut a few scenes and had them end up at the same place, I'm sure, but overall I feel like it's a little too hated, but I can recognize its flaws. And just above it in line at number 4 is The Force Awakens. Now, like everyone, I was there opening weekend, stoked out of my mind for this movie, and I came out thoroughly satisfied. It didn't have the pacing issues like the prequels, there was no Jar Jar equivalent, and just overall, it played it pretty safe. But they played it a little too safe. Now, The Last Jedi is what happens when you don't play things safe enough. The Force Awakens is what happens when you play things a little too safe. It just comes across as pretty bland. And while the action is fun to watch, it just doesn't have the same feeling as the original trilogy, or even some of the prequel scenes. And yeah, there's been plenty of videos comparing it to A New Hope, but I think the main problem isn't that it's a clone of A New Hope, it's just that it doesn't feel as real as the original trilogy, despite having all the ingredients, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but it's just missing something a little special. With that said, I still think it does a pretty good job. Rey, Finn, and Poe are all pretty good additions, and I think Adam Driver does a great job in his role. I also like how Han Solo has his spotlight for this film, and Harrison Ford seemed to be having pretty fun in the role again. I think we'd all be having fun if we were paid $20 million for one film, but overall it doesn't quite touch the original trilogy, which I'm just about to get to now. So for the number 3 spot, I went back and forth for a while, but it's gonna have to go to Return of the Jedi. While I think the film is a lot of fun and moves at a pretty good pace, the opening in Jabba's palace does drag a little bit, and most of the Ewok stuff feels inconsequential. But I don't hate the Ewoks, I think they're actually pretty cute. I just don't think that they should have been used at all in the movie. So, with the bad out of the way, let's just talk about what's great. The second Death Star battle has some of the best space action in a Star Wars movie. Jabba's palace when Luke shows up is a lot of fun. The throne room scenes with Emperor Vader and Luke are all pretty awesome, and the lightsaber duel between Luke and Vader at the end is probably the best in the whole series. I also like the scene where he takes off his mask and talks to Luke. I always thought it was a really sweet moment. And the victory celebration song from the final few moments always gets stuck in my head, and I really like it, and I'm always whistling it, so it's just a great piece of music. So maybe it's the weakest of the original trilogy, but it's still a great conclusion to their stories. So number 2 is gonna have to be the original Star Wars. I've probably seen this movie about 100 times, but even with its nostalgia blinding me, it does drag a little bit, especially the start with C-3PO and R2-D2 in the desert, and the opening space battle. While epic looking in terms of showing the scale of the ships, it does come off a little bit quaint by today's standards. But looking past the obvious hallmarks of older filmmaking, you'll find a wonderful cast of characters with Luke, Leia, Han, Chewie, and Obi-Wan, as well as the menacing Darth Vader. These are the reasons why the original trilogy holds up so well. It has characters that we feel like we know and we want to hang out with and go on adventures with. It also perfectly captures the feeling of being a teenager and wanting to move on to adulthood. And why not watch a movie about good triumphing evil? It's nice to watch a happy film with a victorious ending. So if for some reason you haven't watched the original Star Wars, go check it out. I think it holds up pretty well still. And sliding into the number 1 spot is the sequel, Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Now, I don't think I really have any complaints about this film. Even the special edition and DVD release isn't completely ruined like A New Hope. The added shots of the Wampa are nice, and the exterior shots of Cloud City look pretty good. Empire builds on everything I loved from the first film, and adds so much more texture and consequences to their action. All the Yoda scenes are amazing, and the duel between Luke and Vader as well as the big reveal is iconic for a reason. The cinematography also feels top notch here, and they learned to light Vader and make him feel more robotic. And if I had any complaint, it may be that stop motion asteroid monster that tries to chew the Millennium Falcon. It always looked like a big oven mitt to me, but overall there's a reason people think this may be the best sequel of all time. It just works and builds so much to the already established world. So what do you guys think? Does my list hit the mark, or is this bantha poodoo? You guys excited for episode 9? I still am, but I'm a little bit worried I won't be able to end the series quite right or steer it in the direction that I'm hoping. And I also want to thank all my patrons for supporting my main channel and allowing me to do these other ventures as well. I'd like to thank Anthony Stamps, Karen DeMarsh, Dead Meat, Erica Snoodgrass, Colton Wood, Ethan Roshcam, Zoran Djokovic, HB, Alex Holgan, Ross McIntyre, Q, Anthony Denny, Marie Suri, Reese Ward, Sam Marks Green, Jeremiah Lambert, Minkus Baby, Chris Hogan, Sam, Emmanuel Obregan, David Warshaw, and Paul Kisak. If I pronounce anyone's name wrong, I apologize, and if you'd like to support the main channel and in turn this channel, there's a link in the description and you can become a tele-animated hero as well. And until next time, I've been Aaron, and I'll tell you something later.